actually live streaming it on one of my Chinese partners. We're going to take the live stream and actually break the firewall and put it into the People's Republic of China so they can see the speech tonight, which we try to do every time we speak to reinforce the virtues of free speech. Let's go back in time for a second. It is 5 o'clock in the evening on November 8th of 2016. That's when the mainstream media companies get the first exit polls. This is Donald Trump's 2016 election. The exit polls had us, I think, even in Ohio and Iowa, and losing everywhere else. And I was the guy that told candidate Trump 88 days before, when I stepped in and took over the campaign, that if you stuck to the populist nationalist program, if you focused on illegal immigration, mass illegal immigration to get our sovereignty back and protect our workers, our low-skilled workers, if you focused on legal immigration to protect our tech workers, if you focused on bringing jobs back from China, and if you focused on getting us out of these pointless foreign wars in the Middle East, those three legs of the stool, and you compare and contrast her, Hillary Clinton, for the corrupt and incompetent guardian of the globalist party at Davos. I don't care if you're 10 points behind or 12 points behind or 14 points behind and we have no money and she has $1 billion. It doesn't matter. That message will resonate with working class people and middle class people, and you will win. You will be the President of the United States. I said, forget all the polls. There's only two numbers that matter. Number one, 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 of the American people still thought we were on the wrong track. Right track, wrong track. They admired President Obama and his wife, but they did not think he was an agent of change that the country needed. But more importantly, the most important number was Pat Caddell, who just died a couple of weeks ago, who was the pollster for Jimmy Carter. Pat Caddell had been doing polling for 40 years, and for the first time in American history, working class people and middle class people believed America was in decline, and that our elites, our financial, our corporate, our cultural elites were comfortable with that. And that managed decline to unsuccessful outcomes to its citizen was the number one issue. And that America would back someone who came in and said, we will return America to her former glory. That's what the last 88 days were. On Billy Bush weekend, when everybody wanted him to quit, I said, double down. People don't care about the locker room talk. What they care about is their country, their kids, their grandchildren, their communities, their jobs. We're going to double down. We're going to triple down. So at 5 o'clock in the evening, on November 8th, I wasn't looking so good. We called, actually, the candidate. He took it very well. He said, look, we left everything on the field. We could not have done anything else. Then as the evening progressed, 7 o'clock, polls started coming in, real votes. Things looked a little different in Florida, a little different in Ohio. But at 8 o'clock, the Detroit Free Press, one of the most respected newspapers in the country, been around for 150 years, declared that Michigan had gone for Hillary Clinton. They had never been wrong in their entire, I think, 150 years. I'd had us win in Michigan. So I knew we had a problem. But as the night progressed, we won Florida, we won Ohio, we won North Carolina. You could see in the counties coming in, particularly the counties we had focused on, of working class Democrats, low propensity voters, people that thought that the system had left them behind, started to come in, and we could see some momentum. We could see that we were very close in Wisconsin. We thought we were going to win Pennsylvania. But as it got to around midnight, the Detroit Free Press reversed and said it was too close to call. That's when I told Donald Trump he was going to be the next president of the United States. A couple hours later, AP, Associated Press, called it. They kind of waited to 2:30 in the morning, so we wouldn't exactly address the nation in prime time. The fuse, by the way, the Detroit Free Press did not call the campaign for Donald Trump until, I think, November 25th, when we got the rest of the votes. The lesson is that even people that voted for Donald Trump were afraid to tell anybody. And the algorithms that the hinterland and the small villages and the outer suburbs and the small towns had come out in record numbers. The algorithms that for the big cities, the big cities coming first and then it triggers for the rest, it was wrong. The algorithm was wrong and people would not admit they voted for Trump. Why? Because the demonization of the deplorables, right? What's a deplorable? Deplorable's a citizen, okay? Deplorable's a citizen. I go all over the world. I just got back from Japan. I went up in the island Hokkaido. There are deplorables there, right? There's deplorables in Arizona. There's deplorables in Ohio. There's deplorables in Switzerland, in Italy, in Germany, in France, and here in Norway. They're the little guy. It's the family I come from. My grandfather's a lineman for the phone company for 50 years. My father's a lineman for the phone company for 50 years. We're the most average family in the world. Just average working class people. The bomb that went off on November 8th, because remember when the polls came in, the mainstream media is high-fiving. They're getting ready for night. They were laughing it up. They couldn't believe it. Megyn Kelly's putting on her makeup. Not just is Donald Trump going to be humiliated because it looked like a 400-point electoral victory. Hillary's drinking champagne up there in the Peninsula Hotel. They've got that huge, remember that huge thing they had coming out, jutting out, that convention hall? They had 10,000 people. We had a cash bar for the VIPs. Nothing, right? I mean, nothing. We didn't have a victory speech. We kind of made it up on the spot. We knew we were going to win, but we didn't want to jinx ourselves. The fuse was lit 8 years before. September, I think it's 17th or 18th, 2008, Oval Office. Head of the Federal Reserve, Secretary of the Treasury from Goldman Sachs, Hank Paulson, guy I used to work for. They walk in the Oval Office. Lehman Brothers had gone bankrupt in London on Monday morning, right? In a chain of events, smartest guys in the room didn't realize by letting Lehman go in bankruptcy, the whole system's going to collapse. They walk in and tell Bush, if we don't have $1 trillion by 5 o'clock, the American financial system is going to implode in 48 hours, the world financial system in 72 hours, and you will have global anarchy and chaos in 2 weeks. So President Bush, in a real profiling courage, said, it's not my job. You got to go to Capitol Hill. They're the only ones who can authorize that. The balance sheet of the Federal Reserve at that moment was $880 billion. The balance sheet of the Federal Reserve when Donald Trump raised his hand on January 20th of 2017 was $4.5 trillion. The ECB, the Bank of England, the Bank of Tokyo, the Federal Reserve, all the central banks came up with a solution. We're going to bail out the wealthy. And we're going to bail it out on the shoulders of the common man. Remember, Obama's the most progressive president in American history. Because when you flood the zone with liquidity, you can bail out the big real estate holders, you can bail out the hedge funds, you can bail out the banks, you can bail out the investor class, you can bail out the donors. But there's a corollary to that. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Negative interest rates means a savings account has zero. A checking account has zero. That means if you're just some schmuck that has a job, right, and your little bit of money you're going to put away to save, you're a fool, because the system is not going to reward you. They're going to essentially, that's a tax. Also, you can't do a public bond offering. You can't do a public bond offering to fix the roofs of a school in the United States because there's not enough Jews. They're only 1%, 1.5%. Nobody will buy them. The pension gap. We have a $9.5 trillion pension gap for working class people in the United States because of this. They never want to talk about that. They never want to talk about how they panicked. They didn't know how to handle deflation. The very people that had caused it, bailed themselves out at taxholders' expense, at the common man's expense. And they broke, 2,500, 3,000, 5,000 years of the underpinnings of the Judeo-Christian West, that the householder, the backbone of civic society, the family, you work hard, you save, you put a little bit away, you eventually can buy a house. It's generated, this is why people under 30, 75% of them want socialism or think socialism's cool, because they're nothing but Russian serfs in the 18th and 17th century. They don't own anything. They're not going to own anything. They're 30% behind where their parents are at the same time in life on income, family formation. Why we have a problem? Why we have a demographic problem? Why we have a family formation and people having kids? Every poll says the same thing, whether it's in the United States, Europe, or economic anxiety. You can't plan for your future. Uber just went public for $90 billion today? Was it today or yesterday, $90 billion? The gig economy personified, right? No pension, no stability, one gig to the next. That's globalization. That's the logical conclusion of globalization. The fuse was lit there. This populist revolt, the Tea Party, Brexit, all of it started with a financial crisis, and a financial crisis that we've kicked the can down the road. Yesterday, in a court in New York City, a young woman posing as a German heiress, she's a scam artist. She lived in these posh hotels and ran up a bill, and I think it was $200,000. She got 4 to 12 years in prison. What did the investment bankers get? What did the lawyers get? What did the accountants get? What did everybody associated with the financial collapse get? There were studies and reports and all the stuff that was done. There were 250 criminal referrals to the Justice Department. I think they got some real estate appraisers, some people in Miami and Las Vegas making $60,000 a year. I think they went to prison because they appraised working class people's houses for too much. By the way, the working class got blamed too, particularly the African Americans. Oh, we shouldn't have had them buy these houses. They're the ones at fault. Not the ones who created the economic weapons of mass destruction that went off. Did you see those guys? Did Goldman Sachs return any fees? Did Goldman Sachs' partners return any of their bonuses? Did Goldman Sachs' partners give up any equity? No, you know what Goldman Sachs did? To save Goldman Sachs, on that Monday, the following Monday, they let him go in and sign a one-line piece of paper and made him a bank holding company so they can borrow for 0 or less and lend it to their own clients for a couple of hundred basis points. So every year, just by cutting on the lights, they generate a couple of $1 billion in cash. Now, why do I go through this? Because that's the system that's been created. This system has destroyed working class and middle class people throughout the world and left them angry and full of angst. People say all the time, Bannon, why are you so angry? Why are these deplorables so angry? I said, because they're rational human beings, right? Right? Because it's also your pension funds and your savings and your retirement that's funding this. You know, Zuckerberg didn't have any money. That's pension fund money. All these high and mighty guys in Silicon Valley and all these hedge fund guys and these masters of the universe, not their money. It's your money. In the United States, that's where you go to Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Minnesota. You don't have to have some long, complicated dissertation like you do on Wall Street to get these people to understand about China. They understand where the factories went. J.D. Vance, the Marine Corps captain from Yale, the great sociologist of the Trump deplorables, wrote that book, Hillbilly Elegies. If you haven't read it, you ought to read it. He points to two studies done at MIT and Harvard. Those studies showed there's a direct correlation between the factories that went to China, the jobs that went with them, and the opioid crisis. Tariffs are not about tax. Tariffs are about human dignity, self-determination. It's about bringing manufacturing jobs back to the industrial democracies of the West, to move the supply chain back to Japan and North America and Europe. They had the same surprise on Brexit. Remember, we had Breitbart London. Nigel, God bless him, running the Brexit party day. Remember, on the evening of Brexit, Nigel conceded at 10 o'clock. I had to call him. I said, Nigel, no more beers, right? We got this. We're going to win this. I said, it's those Midland counties. I said, watch these Labor voters. It was Labor voters that voted for Brexit that put it over the top. Just like it's Democrats, Reagan Democrats, and working class Democrats that put Trump over the top. We won with a inside straight, to use a poker term. 75,000 votes in 5 counties. Now, she talks all the time that she won 2.8 million, 3 million. Hey, it's a difference in golf between match play and medal play. If we had to play medal play, we would have gone to California's other states and beaten her on popular vote. It's not a popular vote. It's an electoral college vote. And she was too arrogant and too disdainful of really the backbone of the Democratic Party to go even have the common courtesy to talk to them. We went there every day. Remember, I think we were 3-1 in counties that had the highest combat death ratios. I think we outpolled them. I think we outpolled them at the end 3-1, because we put the message where the people that needed to hear it, and know that you've been dialed out forever, but now you're going to have a voice in the room, and that voice is going to be Donald Trump. Let's cut to the third week of January 2017. There's 2 speeches given, historic speeches. On Wednesday in Davos, my favorite town, right? Davos man. Have you seen these goofballs? Look, I was at Goldman Sachs, okay? I was in the M&A department at Goldman Sachs. These guys are the same collection of clowns. They go to all these conferences and know everything, and they're, Davos man. They're gonna solve all the world's problems, right? If you gave me the choice of how my country was going to be governed, I would take the first 100 people that showed up here tonight versus the first 100 people that showed up at Davos. More grit, determination, common sense, understanding of humanity, right? You don't have to go to Harvard and Oxford and all these places. Look, I went to Harvard. I graduated with honors. It ain't that great, okay? My grandfather went to the 3rd grade. He had more common sense, understood more things than all these guys. Davos, man, it's a complete sham. At Davos, Xi shows up, President Xi. Remember, he gives that speech, the Save Globalization. The Economist, the Financial Times, all of them. He is the hero. He's the hero that's going to save globalization. In fact, he specifically puts all the problems in the world are on these populists and these nationalists, right? They're screwing up the system. System's got to be more globalized. And she is going to lead us to a great new dawning future. Look, the consulting firms, the accounting firms, the law firms, the investment banks, they all trade in one thing, that's information. They're plenty smart. They know about the gulags, okay? They know about the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan Buddhists. They know about the evangelical Christians and the Catholics. They know the gulag that Xi and Washi Shan run as a surveillance state on their own people. There's not a finer group of people in the world than the Chinese people. 1.4 billion people, 90 million members of the Communist Party. The 1.3 whatever billion don't own any property, no land. They own no stock. They own no assets. It's a totalitarian dictatorship as bad or worse as anything we saw in the 1930s. And Davos man knows that. So why is this guy held up as an all-conquering hero? You know why? Money. That's what they worship at Davos, money. They have zero moral authority to dictate to populists and nationalists and sovereignty anything. And the reason I love the kids across the street, and the reason I go to Bergen and places like that and do these media conferences time and time again, is because when they fully understand that they're being played, they're going to be on our side. Two days later, Trump gives the American carnage speech. Oh my Lord, to see a meltdown. We kind of knew when we were helping President Trump write it, it would be a meltdown, right? Mainstream media, what had gotten so wrong the Trump campaign, and if you look at their Twitter feeds, they're all talking to each other, trying to break stories on Trump, right? New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, ABC, NBC, all of them. Huffington Post, some of Fox, right? Just like in the financial crisis, nobody's held accountable. And the mainstream media, they're all about transparency. They're all about accountability. You know, we're here, they want to hold people accountable. Not one person fired. Show me an editor that's fired. Show me a producer that's fired. Show me a reporter that was fired for the biggest miss in media history. Show me one. Because there's not. That's the system. Trump gives American carnage. And we walk through exactly what's happened to the country. This speech is about the Westphalian system. It's about the nation state. It's done in juxtaposition to Brother Xi. Because just like the EU, Xi doesn't want nation states. What they want is administrative units, right? They have a whole central plan, one belt, one road, made in China 2025, 5G rollout, this whole thing. I'll get into a little more detail in a minute. But it's essentially to turn everybody into a source of raw material, a market for end product, and maybe every now and again you will make some component parts for their advanced manufacturing system. And you'll be a nice administrative unit. That's the global system. That's what the EU is. The EU wants Italy to be South Carolina to France's North Carolina. The United States of Europe has been the driving concept of the Jean Monnet and now Macron faction for years. They're up front about it. Macron just did the Renaissance paper. He talks about it. More integration, more foreign policy integration. Now he wants his own army. That's going to go over well. I know a lot of Italian mothers are going to sign up to have their sons and daughters with French and German officers. The world just doesn't work like that. I'm not picking on the French and German. The French and German mother's not going to sign up to have it under Italian officers. Life just doesn't move like that. But the meltdown on American carnage was spectacular. Those two speeches lay it all out. These are two conflicting systems that are now on a collision course. Washington, D.C. today with this trade deal. It's not a trade deal. This is a truce in an economic war. The ballots you guys are going to cast in the European election. The reason, remember, all the mainstream media, all of a sudden, democracy's not working. Democracy's not working. You know what's not working? Because they're losing elections. right? It's working fine when they're winning. Now they're losing. This is illiberal. And that's how we're going to beat them. We're going to beat them at the ballot box. History's on our side. The momentum's on our side. That's what's driving them nuts. That's why they got to have more identity politics. That's what I keep saying. When they start calling you a racist, when they start calling you a homophobe, when they start calling you a nativist, a xenophobe, a Islamophobe, all the concepts, right? Wear those accusations as a badge of honor. Because those accusations show they got nothing. They're never going to debate you on the facts. I'm living experience of that. I take over the campaign on a Saturday night, I think the 13th. Hillary Clinton's been on the beach, sunning. She's 12 or 14 points up. Why campaign? Let Trump just implode. She comes off the beach after a couple of days. We start tightening up some numbers. She comes off the beach in Reno. She gives her first speech in 3 weeks since the convention. It's on Breitbart, Bannon, the alt-right, white supremacy, white nationalism. I'm sitting in the control room. We got all the TVs. I got all the young people. And I just say, I said, nobody knows who Steve Bannon is, and they don't care. Lady, you're running to be commander-in-chief of the most powerful military force in world history, and you're talking about Breitbart. People around the country have to go, what is she doing? Remember, Trump had never been to Breitbart. They used to print every now and again some stories out, but he'd never been to the site. I told people right then, I said, hey, we focus on Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa. Actually, Trump said Minnesota. I waved off on that. My mistake. We only lost by 1 point. Pennsylvania. On economic nationalism, remember, economic nationalism doesn't care about your ethnicity, doesn't care about your race, doesn't care about your religion, doesn't care how tall you are, what your size, shape you are, what your gender is, doesn't care about your sexual preference. It doesn't care about any of that. It cares about one thing. You're a citizen. Because as a citizen, you should get a special, better deal, not a worse deal. That's what the globalists have done. They've kind of flipped the thing upside down because they benefit from the system as it goes today. Two things happened off those speeches. One was the nullification project. This is the opposition party media, and I was the one that I'm proud to say came up with that name. Opposition party media, kind of the Democratic left a little bit. But this thing called the resistance, and you saw it in also the corporatist in the city of London and Wall Street. The Wall Street crowd faction fought Trump every day, right? Particularly his trade policies. The nullification project was to delegitimize him as president about his election. So we had the Russian hoax for 2 years, of which President Trump said, I'm waiving executive privilege. I'm going to send all you guys up there. And if you're at the port, I'm the one saying, hey, don't fire Comey. I think that's dumb. You can fire Comey. You got the rights to do that, but you shouldn't do it. But on the investigation, I said, why are we waiving executive privilege? You've got, these are all privileges between the executive thing. No need to do that. Nope. He says, I want to get it all out there. 1.5 million documents, 500 witnesses, 2,200 subpoenas, everything. For what? Read the report. Nothing. Zero. But the mainstream media, every night, 3 things in the New York Times, CNN, all night long. If the New York Times didn't publish in the morning those stories, CNN would be a test pattern, right? Got to go off the paper record. So this resistance, and by the way, it happened twofold in the city of London with Brexit and in D.C. with Donald Trump. Why is that? Do you honestly think because you win an election, they're going to pat you on the head and say, hey, that's great. Here are the keys. Go do what you want. No, they are not, okay? They are not. You're going to have to win election after election after election. No one election. They're good markers along the highway, but you have to keep winning. This is a process. So you had the nullification process, which 3 years into it, there's no Brexit. Heck, Nigel's created a new party, right? The Brexit party, right? He add Labour and the Tories up together, don't even match him. So they stopped Brexit in its tracks, right? Took away legitimate vote of the British people. And they're trying to impeach Trump. And I tip my hat to them because I like a good fight. They did what the Tea Party did in 2018. They focused on one thing, Donald Trump. They believe the progressive left and the opposition party media believe something the Republican establishment doesn't. They believe that Trump's a transformative figure and a historic president. And he's going to be in their lives 10, 20, and 30 years from now from two things, deconstruction of the administrative state and the judiciary. And the progressive left did what you have to do today to win. They mobilized. They went door to door, and it was a big defeat. 52-46 if you aggregate up the House vote, and I think it's 7 million votes. It's a forerunner to 20. You have to mobilize your base. And they all whine every day, democracy, Trump's so divisive, democracy's it's all. I said 113 million people voted in an off-year election. Biggest number we've ever had. So we had the nullification project. We had had this resistance to Trump and to Brexit. But look at the wins we had. After the historic, quite frankly, big defeat of Macron defeating Le Pen, in the summer of 2017 it looked bad. Salvini was at about 5 or 6%, I think, the Northern League. Bolsonaro was at 5%. Nigel Farage was out of the business. He was gone, okay? Vox was at 0.0. And Le Pen had basically the huge contention about, hey, should you just throw Front National under the bus and start a new party? That's the summer of 2017. With Macron, remember, as soon as Macron won, every cover, the same magazines that had done The Economist, the Financial Times, all of them, populism's over. It's dead. Macron's the great savior of the globalist system. And look at what we've done since then. Salvini's huge victory in February of 2018. Orban again in June, right? Le Pen now in the European parliamentary elections is polling above Macron. Vox just got 10% in a national election, and brother Nigel Farage created a party 3 weeks ago and is polling at 27%, right? Make sure you understand something. This is all with no money and no media platforms. Salvini won with Facebook Live. Bolsonaro won with Facebook Live. These campaigns took a couple of $1 million. But it is grit and determination and a message. And when people understand that message, and they understand that message is not racist, it's not nativist, it's not homophobic, right? It's about working class people and middle class people. They're finally saying enough's enough. This European parliamentary election, when I go around and talk to people, I say, hey, outside of England, they're all Eurosceptics, but they don't want to break up the EU. They kind of want to do what the very wise men and women in Norway did back in the early 90s. If you go back and look at those debates, it's the same debate that's going on today in May of 19. It's all about sovereignty. The big thing was that if we vote ourselves, we're already in the common market, we got the economic deal, but if you vote ourselves into the political deal, we're going to give up the sovereignty of our country, and we may give up the sovereignty we have as citizens to control these politicians, to a bunch of unelected, nameless, faceless bureaucrats in Brussels. The debate was very intense, and I think it was 52-48. For the second time, you voted not to join. And the wisdom of that, and if you go back and look at the debates, it's the same debate today. They're not trying to break up and destroy the EU. They're saying we don't want Macron's United States of Europe. We want a Europe of nations. We want Hungary to be Hungary, France to be France, Italy to be Italy. We all have unique problems and issues in our country, and we're proud of our countries. People say, Bannon, why are you running around Europe? I'm running around Europe. I come from a blue-collar family. Front National, the Swiss People Party, asked me to come over, and I said, what do you want me to talk about? And they said, just tell us we're not alone. Well, you're not alone. I've been all throughout Asia, Latin America, Europe, the United States. We are the majority. We just have to mobilize our vote, and we have to get candidates out that understand that and hold them accountable. And these people have to be fearless. Look at Trump. Whether you like Trump or hate him, what he's gone through, right? The politics of personal destruction, because remember, the left has no rules of the game. They'll come after you as hard as they can come. So you got to understand you have to steel yourself. But why are we at an inflection point? We're at an inflection point because what's going to happen in the end of May is going to be historic. These parties, which had no money and were barely even parties a couple of years ago, could take a third, maybe 40% of the members of the European Parliament. And trust me, after that happens, every day for the guys in Brussels is going to be Stalingrad, okay? You could have Salvini heading the biggest party, Marine Le Pen the second biggest party, and Nigel Farage the third biggest party. You think that's a nightmare for those guys? That doesn't make the job very much fun, does it? But history's on our side. The reason I got excited about this, I came over and just observed. I just wandered around the European election in February of 18, both Five Star and the League. And the intensity, the issues they were talking about, the young people that turned out that were on fire, Five Star running no more on a campaign than say, throw the bums out, right? Kind of citizen politicians, a little to the left, but a populist party. The Nationalist Party of Salvini going against the EU and standing up for the sovereignty of Italy, and particularly in the issues of migration. And I said, that's the future. I had a chance to talk to those guys afterwards. I said, look, you can do the two traditional things of putting together your own coalition, but if you put this together, it would be unique in political history. It would set aside left and right for populism and nationalism. Has it been perfect? No. Has every day been a struggle? Yes. But has it been a worthy experiment? Absolutely. No matter what comes of it in the future. What I try to do in my day job with my C4 in the United States is trying to get 20% of Bernie's people. If we can get 20% of Bernie's and 20% of the African American working class and 25% of the Hispanic working class, along with Trump's deplorables, we will have a realignment in American political history like 1932, like Franklin Roosevelt. We'll govern for 50 years. That's what they're so afraid of. That's why every candidate, the Democratic Party, is now woke to workers, right? They're all on China. They're all up in Ohio and Michigan because they understand that's where the balance of power in the United States lies. And that's where this campaign is going to be fought. Now, on top of all this, and you're starting to see it now in Europe in a big way, is the clash of these two systems. And these two systems, one is this mercantilist, totalitarian surveillance state of China that's rolling out now with One Belt, One Road. They just signed an MOU with Italy for $30 billion, France for $60 billion. They're going to be all over Europe. Predatory capitalism. It's just the British East India Company model in reverse. Lend money you can't pay back, foreclose on the assets, control the assets. Predatory capitalism. The Chinese learned well. Remember, the Chinese system is true fascism. It's state capitalism combined with a totalitarian, all-powerful government. They call us all fascists. They better learn the definition of fascism. We believe in the deconstruction of the administrative state. Your health minister said it better than anybody the other day in pure Trump-type language. Let them smoke cigarettes, drink beer, and eat red meat. They're adults, right? That's what we want to get the nanny state. It's not that I'm not an anarchist. I'm not a libertarian. I'm a populist and a nationalist. I believe in a state. I believe in a small yet strong state, a very strong state. I certainly don't worship it. I'm trying to deconstruct it so it gets at every other aspect of your life and frees up entrepreneurial capital and gets away from the consolidation of corporate power, which is one of our biggest problems. Just look at Facebook and these other companies that are so progressive and trying to take everybody's freedom of speech away, right? That's a problem. We have big government with the consolidation of capitalist power and state capitalism. That's why China's so scary. The industrial democracies, Free market capitalism. This is going to be the great defining issue of our time. And it's just not Donald Trump, the United States of America. Remember, he's bringing the supply chain back to the West. The reason the Midland voters voted for Brexit is not that they can understand it or describe it, but they know the factories aren't there anymore and the jobs are gone. And all these economists that talk about free trade and everything like that, you can't have free trade when we have a house divided. We're half slave and half free. China is a gulag. The Chinese people are as hardworking, as decent as any people on the face of the earth, and they're enslaved. Everybody knows that. There's not even a debate about that. If they weren't enslaved, why don't they take down the firewall? Remember, in this trade negotiation, of all the 6 verticals that are so tough, state-owned industries, forced technology transfers, all the stuff you hear about, the Chinese said, if you bring up the firewall, hit us with tariffs because we're not even going to sit down. Now, why is that? Because in a digital world, the firewall is everything versus us. And this is going to define your life for the next 10 or 20 years because this struggle is a global struggle. Remember, One Belt, One Road unites the Eurasian landmass. Made in China 2025 takes advanced chip design, artificial intelligence, and robotics and combines into all advanced manufacturing, which they will dominate. Advanced chip design, artificial intelligence, and robotics. Game, set, match. Then you take 5G and Huawei. Huawei's not associated with the PLA. They don't kind of know the PLA. They don't have a contract with the PLA. They are the People's Liberation Army's tech group. They understand that in 5G is not some linear progression from 4G. It's a geometric to the power of 10. It's the new internet, the Internet of Things, and quantum computing. It will dominate all technological advances in the future as a backbone. And most importantly, information and data. Data is the new plutonium in that system and can be weaponized. The Chinese know this. They've been working on this information economic war plan for 20 years. They published a book about it called Unrestricted Warfare. If you do not believe me, go get a copy of Unrestricted Warfare, published by 2 colonels in the PLA. I think the most brilliant book on strategy since Clausewitz. And they walk through fundamentally how they're going to do it, and they're doing it. And Trump is the first leader in the West to stand up to him. This is not going to be an easy fight. It's not going to be an easy fight to take the nation state back from the centralized authorities in Brussels. It's not going to be easy for the populist movement to fight Wall Street and the corporatists in the United States of America. It's not going to be easy to confront China. But we're the heirs of Jerusalem and Athens and Rome. We don't have a choice. We're going to be weighed and measured on this. 100 years from now, they're going to see this inflection point and they're going to ask, what did free men and women do? You know what free men and women do? They don't panic when people start attacking you on identity politics. When they attack you on identity politics, you're winning. And we are winning. But we have to be focused. We have to be relentless. It has to be every day. They work every day. The reason they beat Donald Trump in 2018, they outworked him. They outworked his campaign. They outworked the Republicans. I admire that. I disagree with everything they stand for. I like their grit. AOC, she doesn't know much, and what she knows is dead wrong. However, remember, a year ago today, she was a bartender, okay, on the night shift, closing up. She's the 3rd most powerful politician in the United States of America, the most powerful democracy in mankind's history. And you can't blame that on the media. She's got grit, she's got determination, she's got fight. We have the ideas. The question is going to be, do we have the fight? Do we have the guts? Or because people call you names, or because people protest, or because people take you off Facebook, you're going to curl up in the fetal position and say, it's just too hard. Okay? Look back over your families of what they had to do to put you here. The sacrifice. Remember, Burke's dictum is that we owe just as much to the past as we owe to the future. And that's what I ask you tonight. Just think about all of those that came before us and gave us these institutions, gave us this freedom, gave us this wealth. Because if we do not fight as free men and women for our countries, our societies, our institutions, you're going to lose them. And this is not racist. It's not nativist. It's not xenophobic. It's not homophobic. It's called decency and respect and democracy. Thank you very much. Thank you. You're very kind. Thank you. Let's get to the fun part. Let's ask some questions. I'm looking for, since I was in Bergen with all the progressive left journalists, and I gave this hour thing, and then they took questions, they would not call on one woman. 5 guys asked questions. So I want to. Can I start? Is there a female in the audience who wants to ask a question? Because if you don't raise your hand, I'm going to cold call you. You right there. No, you. Ma'am. Yeah.
It's a great honor to see you. I listened to quite a lot of your YouTube videos, and now to see you live, it's great. I feel that quite a lot of us in Norway, we are quite anxious about the Islamic, I wouldn't say invasion, that's a bit too hard, but it certainly has been quite an impact on our country. And I remember you said that Islam is not the danger, it is Sharia. But of course it is a question of demography. We could be outnumbered, I mean.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Is the mic on? Okay, great, thanks. The very first, so Donald Trump ran on a campaign that we were going to go after radical Islamic terrorism. In fact, I will quote from that same inaugural address. Quote, "We will form new alliances and rejuvenate old ones, and we will unite the civilized world to eradicate radical Islamic jihad from the face of the earth." Now, when President Trump wrote those words down in Mar-a-Lago, I said, "Mr. President-elect, that's a pretty big check you're going to have to cash, right? Eradicate radical Islamic terrorism from the face of the earth." So he said, "No, I want it to stay." And so what we did, the very first thing we did was to have a conference in Riyadh. Remember, Trump in the first 100 days of his administration, you may not remember this because the mainstream media didn't think it was important enough. They thought the Comey firing and the Russian investigation, this is all, the front page every day. We went to Riyadh, to Jerusalem, and to Rome in that sequence to send a message. It's the first president's ever started his administration by going to an Arab capital and the capital of the country that has the 2 holy sites. And there was 3 reasons, and we worked for 100 days. State Department didn't want to do it. All the geniuses on Morning Joe, this is a bunch of clowns, don't want to do it, right? It was, I think, 51 Muslim nations showed up. And there were three parts to the visit. Number 1, we are going to stop the financing of radical Islamic jihad, okay? And we're going to stop it in the Gulf. Number 2, we're going to address this expansionary, hegemonic focus of Persia as they take over 6 Arab capitals and get onto the peninsula of Saudi Arabia and try to put a pincer move on the Sunni Arabs. And number 3, with General el-Sisi in Egypt and others in the Gulf Emirates, they reached out to us to do whatever assistance we can to help and assist Muslims to bring Islam in and through modernity. We can't do that. We can maybe assist. Let's go back to Pope Benedict's speech at Regensburg. Remember, we had the bloodiest wars, some of the bloodiest wars in mankind's history as Christians. The 30-Year War, right? We had to go through the Enlightenment. That's what Pope Benedict said, the reason and faith of the West. If you remember that photo of the President Trump with General Sisi and the King of Saudi Arabia putting his hands on the globe, it looked kind of eerie. That's a new center for Islam and modernity, right? Or Islam and the combating of extremism, thought of by the Muslim nations. The Muslim nations are our natural ally in helping to stop radical Islamic terror and radical Islamic, the concept of it, right? It's not Islam's the problem. Islam is not the problem. The problem is Islamic, political Islam and Islamic supremacy, right? It's categorized sometimes in certain aspects of Sharia law, but certainly with these radical imams. That's what the travel ban. Remember, we were torn apart on the travel ban. Travel ban was basically countries that President Obama had put on kind of a list that we decided didn't have the administrative apparatus, as Obama said, to fully vet people coming to the United States of America, right? And that's what we did, and the Supreme Court upheld it after a year because it's to keep our country safe and keep our citizens safe and keep Muslims who live in the United States safe. There's a way forward. They understand in their societies today this radical aspect of it is the greatest ticking time bomb they've got. Because I've met with these folks. They're our natural ally. And as long as we do it in a organized, charitable, professional, but relentless way, we can do it. Now, the globalists and the mainstream media, all of a sudden you're Islamophobe. I'm not an Islamophobe. I was one of the architects of the Riyadh summit with President Trump, helped work on his speech and all the action plans afterwards by reach out from Muslim nations. To me, there's no greater hero in the world. I think General el-Sisi's a hero. His speech on 1 January of 2013 at Cairo University said Islam has to take itself through modernity and come out the other side. And the West can assist to the degree that it can assist, but Muslims have to do this. I'm actually very confident that with more victories of people that believe in the nation state, we're going to take care of this problem. Remember, because the elites don't have the problem. They don't have the problem. They got security guards and their kids go to special schools. They got a special deal. But working class people, middle class people don't. We have a bigger issue than that. Sub-Saharan Africa and Central America. The poverty there, there's nobody in this room that wouldn't agree this is a tragedy of biblical proportions. If any one of us was down there, we'd be heading north too. Right? The solution for Sub-Saharan Africa is not on working class people in southern Italy. That's what Salvini's point is. And the problems in Central America can't be solved by working class people in Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, or now up in Ohio and Michigan. It's got to be solved in those countries. It has to be more engagement by corporations and governments. We can do this. It's not that complicated. It takes political will. And we ought to be the drivers of that. People that believe in the nation state understand that we have to bind together. You know, one of the things, on your question, I want to go to NATO for a second. Because Trump is supposed to be destroying NATO. Everybody came to us and said the central problem is the NATO militaries are not as up to speed as they should be. They can't really defend themselves. And what our point is America is not an imperial power. We're not looking for protectorates. We don't want Europe to be a protectorate. We want it to be an ally. We want the Gulf Emirates to be allies, not a protectorate. South China Sea, Northwest Pacific, Japan and Korea. We're a revolutionary power. We're not an imperial power. And what the globalists want is the United States to have this kind of expeditionary humanitarian military that goes everywhere and sticking their nose in everybody's business, right? And I can say this, I got skin in the game. I was a naval officer for 4 years at sea in the South China Sea, the Persian Gulf. You see that carrier battle group that's going to Iran right now. I spent 6 months out there on Camel Station and Gonzo Station. My daughter is a West Point graduate, and she served with the 101st Airborne in Iraq. The big thing I got on my mantle at home is she's sitting there with her weapon on Saddam Hussein's throne. So I've got skin in the game. My family has skin in the game. And we don't want these kids deployed all over. And what's happened with NATO in Trump's 2 years of presidency, $100 billion of additional defense spending has come to make the NATO alliance much stronger and much more robust. So it's a problem. It's not insurmountable. It takes winning elections, and it takes being indefatigable, because you're going to be called every name in the book. But just remember, when you fight this fight, your biggest ally are people of the Islamic faith. They want to solve it too. Next question.
Dag Myhre, Progress Party. Thank you very much, Mr. Bannon, for a fantastic speech, and we learned very much from it, very instrumental. We learned in school that nationalism in Europe is a very bad word. And the First World War will say that there were nations against nations, and it was a nationalistic war, while the Second World War was ideologies and nationalism, like National Socialism. So that was the bad part of nationalism. But then again, you have the other part of nationalism that makes people feel that they belong to a nation, and that they have a country that they can call their own. And I like you to elaborate and to discuss how do we identify the division line between the bad nationalism that leads to attacking other nations and the good nationalisms that makes us feel at home in our own country. Thank you.
I got it now. When that mic's working, mine's not. I got it. I got the system. Populist, nationalist, and sovereignty movement, okay? In Europe, I realize there's some sensitivity to the word nationalism. But I don't think these were nations and working class people, the nationalism we have today. The First World War was all empires, essentially, right? Kings and the dukes and all these people, you know, the guns of August, right? Looking at stuff on checkerboard and let it into look, the 20th century is the bloodiest century in mankind's history. They're going to look back 500 years from now and consider it a dark age. Well, we killed 250 million people, thereabouts, through wars, starvation. And I say the war that started in August of 1914 didn't end until the Berlin Wall came down in 1989. It's a protracted, 50, 60, 70-year war. But on the other side of that, we got back to the Westphalian system. We had these empires, and then you had ideology. And don't think that Adolf, the guys say Hitler's a conservative. He's not, he's a socialist. And more importantly, these guys are gangsters. That's why they're equated with the Chinese Communist Party today, the CCP. Wang Qishan and Xi are gangsters. They're not politicians, they're not statesmen, they're gangsters. Just like Mussolini, just like Hitler, right? Just like Tojo. Just like all that crowd that ran the Soviet Union. They're the same way, they're all gangsters. And who beat them? The little guy, right? On the shoulders of the little guy, they were defeated. I say that's a perfect example of why you don't want elites running things. If you had empowered working class people and middle class people, you're not going to send your sons and daughters to war. Salvini and Orban and Le Pen, these aren't warmongers. What they want is jobs and economy, and what they want is control their own migration system, right? Get back to have their education system, teach the great values that made those nations as great as they are. It's not a big ask, but the globalists, the elitists, the left, think it's the worst thing in human history. I had NBC reporter Engel talk to me at that monastery I'm starting with, or taking over a monastery to have this Academy of the Judeo-Christian West. So this is Richard Engel, the #1 foreign correspondent for NBC News. Very nice guy, but he's sitting there, he goes, tell me what the Academy is going to teach. I said, the underpinnings of the Judeo-Christian West, our values, what's made us special, and kind of the substrate. He goes, oh my God, that's terrible. On TV. He got triggered. He wasn't the same after that. I had to kind of calm him down afterwards. They're going to call you everything. And so that's why most people in Europe say they're the sovereignty movement. That's fine. Remember, it's the Westphalian system, right? And the Westphalian system works because the nation is the best unit of which the citizen can have the most control. This is why I support Vox in Spain, because they're anti the total separation of Spain, right? Because once you start going that road, you're going to have 5 groups in Norway. You're going to have, look, I come from Richmond, Virginia. That's my hometown. I know how these independent movements end, okay? Not well. So I say the nation state's the basic unit that binds people together. The citizen, it gives the citizen the most power. Why don't we go, just stay right there, so we'll go 1, 2. I'll make these answers shorter.
Mr. Bannon, first of all, I want to commend you on your attire tonight. You look quite smart. There was a there was a point made yesterday from our national broadcasting system, BBC of Norway, that you were being, you wanted to look disheveled on purpose, just to sort of be a blokey kind of guy. Okay, that's just a comment. 2 questions.
That actually comes natural.
2 questions. First of all, last night in Bergen, you were faced with the elite core of journalists in Norway, and we asked quite few questions. You can make this short, but was there any questions from a very sharp mind that you would like to have been posed yesterday? That's the first question. And the second one, what's the latest on the Chinese trade negotiations? Yeah. Thank you.
So look, most of the questions yesterday are about, Breitbart's races, the comment section of Breitbart's this, all this kind of stuff. It's fine. I get those questions all the time. I can answer them. I didn't think they were, I thought the interview was great. I thought she did a great job. I didn't think some of the questions, I was expecting more intense questioning or better questions like we've had already tonight that would cause you to think. I think, look, and this is not to pick on the journalists in Norway. They're all the same all over the world, right? No, because they have a worldview, they have a mindset, and they've had to have that in order to move up the system. They're company men, right? If you get out and you start working at a Breitbart, or you work at some other thing, or you start espousing these kind of ideas of populism and nationalism, or you follow them, you're out of the club, you're ostracized. They've ostracized a couple in the United States. So if you want to have a career, very early on you have a mindset. And that's why it's the same questions all the time. And that's why, think about it. They missed the 2016 election hugely because they didn't understand this populist revolt in the United States against the Clintons and what the Clintons stand for, more importantly. And then they spent 2 years in the Mueller report. Remember, all that time spent on winning the House was to weaponize the Mueller report. Unfortunately, the Mueller report came up and it's unweaponizable, right? It's a doorstop. And yet every night, I'm going to be on CNN tonight live on Anderson Cooper talking about China from here, right? I was booked a couple of nights ago on another network to do it, and it got canceled. Where they came back to me and said, hey, we don't need you to talk about China. We want you to talk about Trump's billion-dollar losses on his taxes in the 80s and the bar thing. I said, dude, it's 30 years ago. I said, you're kidding me. He says, no, we're doing 2 segments on his taxes. So they can't get over that. They can't move beyond it. And yet what concerns me about it Remember, because they asked me what I read. The first thing I read the Financial Times, read the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Guardian, Times of London. Just know thy enemy, right? But to get in to just know what's kind of going on, because it still has good reportage. The problem is the editorial page is on the front page of each one of those papers, of how they slant it. So that's a problem. It's particularly a problem, I can tell, in Norway, where you have a much smaller, more concentrated elite, a much more concentrated media. It's how an alternative media kind of comes up. But I can tell you, remember, when Andrew Breitbart died, he died 4 days before we launched the new site you saw today. Breitbart was only 10 million page views, 1.5 million uniques. I think people on the site, 90 seconds, right, on average. And then, right, you know, when I left, I think there were 40 million uniques, 300 and 350 million page views, people on the site 7 minutes. That was the team in the news that drove that. So these things can happen, right? You can catch an audience's attention and do that. And I think that's going to happen. Before I left Breitbart, I had these grand plans. I'd started London, I'd started Rome, we'd started Jerusalem, was going to start France and Germany, and then go to every nation in Europe and do one in its own language, right? That was the grand plan. And that didn't get executed, but that model's out there for someone to do. And I think, just like we're capitalists, what this media needs is competition. Once they have competition, they'll start to, I think, respond to that competition. On China, I think what I know so far, this is very impressive. President Trump's the first guy in history. This is not Republicans and Democrats. This is globalist versus nationalist. That President Trump is the first president we've had that has basically told the Chinese, you're not going to retrade me, right? To get to these deep structural changes, we're going to require monitoring into your state capitalism and actually starting to take it apart brick by brick. And that's what you're going to have to agree to, or we're going to crush you with tariffs. And the tariffs are actually working economically for us. We know this. And Trump's not backing off. I think today that, you know, there would certainly be no deal. I wouldn't imagine. There'll be some, I think maybe a process. But that's because Trump is standing up for the West. Yeah. Yes. Yes, he sent a very nice letter because they're very close personally. She's an emperor, right? Putin's a czar and she's an emperor. That's what you just got to remember. He did send a nice letter, and I'm sure it had a lot of nice words. And remember, they came with Obama. You know, Obama and tried to, you know, reel him in on cyber. They went to the Rose Garden, and she signed a deal with Obama that had all these provisions in there about cyber intrusion to take intellectual property from American businesses and European businesses. She goes to Rose Garden. They have a huge ceremony, a state dinner. It's a state visit. You know, the fife and drums are out, everything. The next week, the PLA triples down. They're hitting us harder than they've ever hit us. This is not about the Chinese people. This is a radical cadre of a criminal class that controls and suppresses the Chinese people. 1.3 billion people own nothing. Nothing. The Chinese Communist Party of 90 million, and really only about 500,000 to 1 million inside that, control the entire apparatus. So this is going to be a great struggle. It's going to take 20 or 30 years, and they're coming to Europe with big checks. And so Europe's going to have to do a gut check. Yes, sir.
Mr. Bannon, I'm a former MP of the Progress Party, and I'll thank you for the credits you have given us in the newspapers today. It's not very often. I'll follow up the lady there and radical Islam. I think the people in Norway not take that question and the problem serious enough. Have you an advice to us to open the eyes of the Norwegian people? And you are a Christian yourself, a Catholic, and we see the Catholic Church doesn't do nothing to stop the immigration to Europe. They have an open door policy in immigrant question. What's your comments on that?
Those are great questions. First off, the Progress Party, the shout out I gave you guys is that, and I point to Norway's vote in '92 as what a group of smart citizens that, this thing that's so amazing about Norway, if you go back and look at that debate, they projected out to 2019 of exactly what the problems would be. and they said, we don't want to do that. That's not us. That's not our country. That's not what we were bequeathed, okay? That's democracy in action. When people argue these ideas, fight for these ideas, and both times it was very close, but it was prophetic. Then what I admire, and I tell people about the Progress Party all the time, there's one thing to run as an insurgent, there's another thing to govern. Remember, I used to be the chief strategist of the White House for a couple of months. You can see this everywhere. You can see it in Salvini, you can see it in Italy, you can see it in Bolsonaro. It's one thing to run, it's another thing to govern. And what I admire about the Progress Party, I think you're a shining example to other populist parties throughout the world about how you work hard and actually get into a coalition. And in that coalition, you're going to have to make trade-offs, but you're learning how to govern. And you're taking your shots. Because most of the groups in Europe are going to end up in coalition governments where they're a minority. And you're going to have to learn how to bring it on what you consider most important, where you don't have all the votes all the time. And that's why I think the Progress Party, to me, is a great example of how you do that. Remember, we won with Trump. The Republican establishment, I reached out to those guys the first day I took over the campaign. If we did not have the Republican establishment, Mitch McConnell and those guys that worked with us, Trump would not be president. Now, because the populists and nationalists, we needed some of those traditional Republican votes. Some of the, not screw-ups, of some of the things we didn't accomplish was because we couldn't work together. Not the Democrats, when we controlled everything, it was we didn't know how to work together, okay? And the Republican establishment had much more firm ideas than the populists, and we didn't have the think tanks and didn't have the personnel. So we had to learn, and that's why I think Trump's getting better. And so I think the Progress Party teaches people what you have to do in order to actually do this thing called governing. So I tip my hat to you guys. You guys have been an inspiration.
You need this one. Hello, Mr. Bannon. Maybe you should answer this briefly because it may be a question for the geeks. But you talked a lot about economics and technology. Can you say a few words about your take on cryptocurrency? Is it a good thing that everyone can be their own bank, or do we need centralized banks?
I think crypto, in the future, crypto and non-fiat currency could be one of the driving forces in populism in the future, but there's many technological issues. The companies, I actually lived in Asia and have a lot of experience in Asia because I was investor in the companies that were forerunners to crypto. In fact, Block One, as an example, is made up of people that, some of whom I hired when they were 17 years old as hackers. But one of the problems we have in crypto is the ability to hack. So I think crypto's got a long way to go before. I think blockchain, the underlying technology, is very powerful and is going to be a driving force, I think, in the populist movement in the future. I think crypto, and I'm not a believer in fiat currency, is going to eventually we'll go to certain types of cryptos, but I think I believe it's decades away. But can I say one thing? I just want to answer your question real quickly. You stay right there, about the church. Remember, I'm leading an effort the Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth and the succession of popes, right? But his administrative and financial, he's not infallible. The Catholic Church, to me, has done a terrible job. Is one of the instigators of much of this asylum problem we have. I think they've been terrible in Europe. They've been very anti-Salvini. In the United States, they just gave $500,000. The Catholic Bishops Fund, Peter Pence, gave $500,000 to the migrants coming up to the United States, when that problem has to be solved in Central America. So my problem with the Pope is this pedophilia crisis. He refuses to address with zero tolerance. And the church is going to be financially liquidated in 10 or 15 years in the United States if we go down this path. I head up an organization that's going to call in 2 weeks when the new cardinal is installed at the Archdiocese of Washington. We're going to call for all 192 dioceses in the United States of America to go to the state attorney generals and request formally that the state attorney generals come in and do a complete, total investigation with a grand jury of every aspect of this sexual abuse crisis. And only then can the church, I think, really vet this. It has to use secular authority to do that. Now, their heads are going to blow up when we ask for that, but I think the church is an administrative and financial disaster right now. How they've handled this crisis is inexcusable. And so the Pope and I are not exactly that close. Yes, sir. And I had nothing to do with the 26 theologians who came out, including Aidan Nichols, who I think is the greatest living theologian at Cambridge, and accused the Pope of the crime of heresy last week. Although I did mount the letter up on my wall in my office. Yes, sir.
Yes. So, yeah, first of all, it's a great honor. And as a Scandinavian American, son of a U.S. Marine, I would like to thank you for being a champion for the little guy and being impelled to aid others in understanding truth. And most importantly, slaying vicious vampires. 2 questions. You have been involved in making 2 great books and films, Clinton Cash and The Bush Bucks. Is it going to become a trilogy with Biden Bucks soon? And the second question, in the topic of bringing in the Bernie people, are we going to have some learnings from the 5-star movement in Italy to implement in the U.S.? Thank you.
Okay. We started, Peter Schweitzer is an absolute genius. He's the guy that does the research and has a team at the Government Accountability Institute, which I chaired. We started, I think, 4 or 5 years before Hillary Clinton ran, the investigation that became Clinton Cash. And I think as you find out more of this crossfire hurricane project that you're hearing about, which was the spying on the Trump campaign, I believe you're going to see that the inciting incident that got Blumenthal and these guys to start looking for a dossier and all this stuff about Trump and other candidates came off of the May 2015 New York Times 7,000-word article on Uranium One and Clinton Cash. Now, that work had taken years to do it. We had to get, bills of lading and everything. Peter did an amazing job. And the power of that book, it exposes the Clintons for the grifters they are. Remember, Tom Fitton at Judicial Watch and Dave Bossie at Citizens United, it was their FOIA request that found out that she had the 33,000 emails. You know what the 33,000 emails are? The reason she made them disappear, it's all during the time as Secretary of State she was on the road, and it's her setting up meetings or with Bill to do the grift, okay? They're pure grifters. And don't take my word for it. The person that thought of the grifters was Barack Obama and John Kerry. Remember, when she's being confirmed by the United States Senate in a Democratic-controlled Senate on the Foreign Affairs Committee that John Kerry chairs, he says we have to have her and her husband write a special memo. Like every time she wants an outside meeting or he's going to have an outside meeting to show there's no conflict of interest. That was the Obama White House. They know they're total grifters. They left the White House $10 million in debt because of the Monica Lewinsky lawsuits, $10 million in debt. Today, I think they're worth $250 million. They're going around the country charging $1,000 a head to hear them talk. I mean, these people are beyond the pale. Clinton Cash started years ago because we knew that Hillary Clinton was going to be, if not the nominee, in the hunt. And then if you want to take her down, you've got to really do the research to take her down. And that was independent of anything else we were working on. What's a grifter? Oh, sorry. A grifter is a kind of an American term for a con artist. Somebody's always, the grift is kind of the vig you take off the top of a con, right? So the Clintons are con men. And it's always about money. So they're called grifters. And they are the epitome of grifters, of con artists. The long con, right, of how you get really wealthy. There's a book out. You asked about the trilogy's out. It's been suppressed. When I was in the White House, the book's called Secret Empires. It's why I go around now and say about Joe Biden. We started, before Clinton Cash came out, the research team was free. So we started researching money from China coming into the American political system. Because look, Russia's got some guy, they gave some guy $10,000 to buy 2 tickets at the inauguration, right? So they could have seats down here. The Chinese are flowing tens and hundreds of millions of dollars through the system. Anbon Insurance Company, H&A, and Huawei. These are money laundering and influence peddling operations. Anbon Insurance, which owns the Waldorf Astoria and many other properties. H&A, which is a $1 trillion finance company, owns 10% of Deutsche Bank. And Huawei, which is the PLA. And by the way, on the live stream of the China, if the folks at H&A, Anbon Insurance Company, and Huawei don't like it, please take me to a federal court in the United States and sue me, right? I'd love to do discovery on you guys. So we started on Biden and Mitch McConnell. We picked a Republican and a Democrat. Joe Biden in 2013 goes on Air Force Two to Beijing in the middle of all this controversy about those man-made islands, about cyber tech, about Obama's pivot to Asia. He's the lead sled dog. He goes over, he takes his son, the hunter, the deadbeat one, and this is not me speaking, his divorce paper from his wife says he used the kids' college money and the mortgage payments for prostitutes and cocaine, okay? That's in the divorce filings. This is a guy with no financial background. He goes over there with John Kerry's stepson, Teresa Heinz's son, these two pieces of work, with no experience. The Bank of China, they stay for 10 days. The Bank of China gives their new private equity fund $1 billion in cash. And they up it to $1.5 billion. All of you in the finance know how hard it is to raise money. The Bank of China is the only central bank of any G20 country that reports directly to the government. ECB, Bank of England, Bank of Tokyo, Federal Reserve don't report. They report directly to Wang Xishan and President Xi. He took $1.5 billion from the Chinese communists, and it gets worse. How could it get worse? Where did Hunter Biden put the money? I'm going to leave the Ukraine thing off for a second because because the Ukraine's a whole different deal. Yeah, well, there may be I think he's taking money from Ukraine too, but I want to leave Ukraine. That's a whole different deal. It's going to stink to high heaven, but it's a different deal. No, he starts investing in the surveillance companies. He starts investing in the exact companies that are enslaving the Chinese people. And here's a question I got for Joe. And Joe Biden the other day, in the middle of this whole fiasco and this economic war and trade, and Wall Street's up and down, we lost $2 trillion in a week in world stock markets. Joe Biden goes, hey man, China, they're not a competitor. How could you be anybody from a sophomore high school beyond it knows that they're the single biggest competitor of the West? He sits there in total denial. He's either been compromised or he's so totally incompetent that, to me, he shouldn't be competitive in the Democratic Party. And this is not for Steve Bannon and Donald Trump to take care of. The Democrats running in this, and particularly Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, all these faux populists. You know, Bernie Sanders had Clinton Cash. Bernie Sanders was not the nominee. It was Donald Trump that had to deliver the hammer blows. Bernie Sanders had a pillow fight with her. He had all the information, and he didn't want to go in for the kill. The Clintons are like the mafia. If you're going to go, you got to give them a head wound, okay? Clinton Cash was that, and he didn't use it. It's incumbent upon Bernie Sanders today for Bernie Sanders to go after Joe Biden. It shouldn't be Donald Trump's or Donald Trump's campaign. This should be the Democratic primary, and Elizabeth Warren should go after Joe Biden for his corruption. How much money did he take from the Chinese Communist Party and the Bank of China? How much wealth has his family created off of that? What investments did they make? And personally, what money did he make? To me, he's got to answer those questions before he's a legitimate candidate.
I have.
Owns a central bank.
Hello. I have a question about the American labor market, because you were mentioning Uber. And the Progress Party in Norway, they are welcoming Uber in Norway. I don't agree. But my question for you is how to meet the gig economy where the winner takes it all, very, very few big companies, how to stop them from exploiting the people who work in their system?
Great question. I think it's a huge problem. I think the gig economy is all about, look, remember, I'm not a libertarian and I'm not a believer in the Austrian School of Economics, so you can boo now, right? I understand the Chicago School and all that, and I appreciate it, but I think that this is a huge problem. I think this is indentured servitude. This is new serfdom. Remember, people under 30, 35, they're in better shape, they're better fed, they're better clothed, they get more access to information than any person in the world in world history. But they're nothing more than 18th century Russian serfs. You don't own anything, you're not gonna own anything, right? You're in this gig economy that you're gonna kind of bounce from gig to gig with de minimis pay and competing from every labor market in the world. That's why I'm a protectionist. You can't have a civic society like that. It will break down over time. Yeah, Uber will go public at $90 billion and go to the Daily Mail. They got the whole list of Hollywood, the Hollywood superstars that are all cashing out because they put money in the venture capital fund they're supported. All the Hollywood crowd that completely rips on Donald Trump and rips on all the populists and nationalists as the worst people in the world. Well, they got their snouts in the trough, okay? And you don't see them worrying about the workers of these gig economy, companies. So I think it's going to be a huge issue in the future, and it's one of the fights we're having in the Republican Party, because the Republican Party is, very anti-labor, right? Traditionally, the donor classes, not the voters. 80% of the voters are, and the reason Trump's president, and what we have to win again, we have to win. If we don't win working class Democrats, Reagan Democrats, Donald Trump is not going to be the president of the United States in 2020. The battleground in 2020 is going to be Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. That fortress in the north is going to be the battleground. And we've got to win that, and we've got to win that with policies that bring jobs back and bring manufacturing jobs and get away from this gig economy. How about, I don't want to go too long. Is there a couple more questions? No, I just don't want to go too long this evening.
The Labor Department in the United States, they launched a note 10 days ago which said the Uber, what to call it, laborers should be contractors. While the Obama administration, they said they are ordinary workers who should be protected by labor law system. So you are obviously more, or Donald Trump is more liberalist than you, or do you understand my question? My English is so lousy. I'm sorry.
Your point's well taken. Okay. Let me just get you. No, remember the tax cut. I wasn't a huge proponent of the tax cut the way it was structured. One of the reasons we didn't get a more populist tax cut, and I do think the tax cut worked to start to bring manufacturing jobs back on the corporate side, I totally disagreed with the structure. In fact, I thought that the higher brackets should pay more taxes. I recommended a 44% rate over $5 million. And when the donors all come to me and they get all angry, I say, hey, If you don't start paying higher marginal taxes on your income, we're going to start losing to the AOCs and to the Bernies, and they're going to come after your assets, okay, where your real wealth is. And what did Elizabeth Warren say when she kicked off her campaign? She started with the asset tax, 2% at $50 million and 3% at $1 billion. Where the Democrats are going is to seize assets. So if we don't have a more equitable tax structure, I think we're going to go there. And I totally disagree. Remember, I probably won 2/3 of the fights inside the White House when I was there. There were certain fights, like I don't think they should be contractors. I think they ought to be employees. If you're contractors, you're just going to be a gig economy. I'm adamantly opposed to that. But that is not the orthodoxy of the Republican Party. Remember, when I walk in a room with Republicans about trade, they spit on the floor. They're total free traders, right? They haven't gotten the idea that you can't have free trade against a mercantilist system. So no, that's one of the big revolutions you're seeing in both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Right now, remember, populism's winning in the United States. Bernie Sanders and AOC and all that, Elizabeth Warren, are all populist. Now, they're different. They don't believe in deconstruction administrative state. They believe in more state intervention, where we believe in deconstruction. So, but populism is the driving force in American politics, like I think it's becoming here in Europe. How about 2 more questions? Is that good? How about back here? Right there? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Right here. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, since I am maybe the most Islamophobic person in Norway, I would like to get back to Islam.
Why are you Islamophobic?
I'm wondering, and I've been wondering about...
No. Why are you Islamic? You said you're Islamophobic. Why are you Islamophobic?
Oh, because I wrote a book named Islam, the 11th Plague. I can tell you more about that later tonight.
Very subtle title. Keep going.
Okay.
I'm a Pam Geller, so I've done this before.
Yeah. Anyway, I've been wondering about how to tackle political Islam. We are not tackling it in Europe. It's not a question for the politicians. And I've been thinking like this, that if Donald Trump dares to take political Islam head-on, and if he has success with that, for example, putting a ban on the Muslim Brotherhood, number one, will he dare to do that? Number two, do you think it will have any effect when it comes to the European politicians' capacity to act on Islam? If it can have some kind of, yeah.
So of the, if you haven't seen it, Frontline, PBS, the kind of very liberal organization, just did a film they worked on for a year. It was just put out on Tuesday. It's online. It's called Trump's Trade War. And I recommend you all go online and watch it. It's Trump's Trade War. And it talks about all the fights inside the White House, all these vicious knife fights we had between the globalist and the nationalist, right? The globalist being Steve Mnuchin and Gary Cohn and this kind of Wall Street crowd, and the nationalists being people like Peter Navarro and Stephen Miller and myself. And they just dealt with trade, but these fights took place all the time. They took place on immigration and the travel ban and others. Of all the fights that we won, the Paris Accord and TPP and the travel ban and all the things we won, the hardest, moving the capital, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, all these tough fights that we had to get stuff done in the first year of the administration. By far the hardest, and the one we made the least progress on, was designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. The apparatus of the United States government, and this is why I think Trump's such a breath of fresh air, and Trump has been, and it's not a deep state. You got to drop that term. It's not a deep state. It's an in-your-face state. They're not deep. They're there. Every meeting, and they're obvious. It's not a conspiracy. They do it every day, right? It's a combination of these kind of Wall Street guys, the big law firms, these people in the government that go back and forth between the law firms and the investment bank and then come back into government. And when I tried to do the Muslim Brotherhood, it was, oh no, this is I sat in the first meeting and somebody says, oh no, this is really a charitable organization that runs hospitals and schools. And I said, you're kidding me, right? But that was the mentality. And we got very little lift on it. Now, I will tell you, General Sisi and the guys in Egypt and others throughout the Middle East that have designated, I think CARE in UAE is designated as either an affiliate or somebody that augments terror. Muslim Brotherhood is their number one issue. When I talk about going over to the Riyadh and working as partners to stop radical Islamic terrorism, and they got to stop the financing of it, they're up front to say, hey, the Muslim Brotherhood's everywhere, and that's got to be stopped, and you guys have to designate them a terrorist organization to start off with. So I still think, and President Trump said the other day, he's starting after El-Sisi's visit, just a random occurrence, right? Because I know when General Sisi's sitting there, he's going, you got to help me here. These guys are terrible. This is a terrible organization. So Trump said publicly after that we're going to reinitiate designating the Muslim Brotherhood, just as we did the Revolutionary Guard the other day as a terrorist organization, and that was a heavy lift, right? Although I would recommend we should have done the Muslim Brotherhood first, but I think it's a process. Here's how you're going to eradicate it. You're going to have to get on the books. I know it's tough. You're just going to have to be on it every day. And you're going to have to keep electing politicians like Trump. And you have to understand you're going to be called Islamophobe and haters and xenophobes and all that. But remember, you have allies in the Islamic community that want this stopped too. In fact, they're our greatest allies. The people in the Gulf and the people in Egypt understand that there's a cancer that's now spread into their own societies, right? That has a higher probability of taking them down, right? And hurting their people and their resources than even the West. And so look, it's a problem that people have looked the other way for 40 or 50 years, and it's going to take, a reasoned approach, but a relentless approach to do it. How about one more question, and then we'll... Oh, okay.
Thank you, Steve, for being here. Microphone. Thank you, Steve, for being here. First of all, I have a personal greeting to you from Charles Hotel in New York, a friend of me. When you're talking about emails, I probably didn't know what I touched, but I was introduced to Anthony Weiner 6 years ago at the Grand Hyatt Hotel. My question is that I think that the conservative Judeo-Christian people need to be the adult in the room. And I think it's all about finding systems, a way that we actually can manage and understand the past and look into the future. I think that Schulz and Howe in the book, The Fourth Turning, was a great tool. I think I read it first time in 2000. It came out in 1997. And I also know that you have comment on that book, so I'm interested to understand if that is actually a kind of a platform that is used for our, getting more meat on the bone, so to speak.
If you haven't read it, he's talking about a book called The Fourth Turning. It's this theory of history about cycles, that history cycles in 80 to 100-year cycles. I can't more strongly recommend a book to kind of understand. You can understand characters like Donald Trump and Matteo Salvini and Orban and Le Pen and Farage only by understanding kind of this fourth turning, this concept. These are fourth turning leaders that in a crisis start to come forward. And at normal times, you would never hear of them. Donald Trump would have been a real estate guy, right, and a reality TV host. He's president of the United States because of the situation changed, and people were looking for something different. And the book explains it very, very well. One last, I got to jump. One last question. You right there.
Thank you. I just want to thank you, just because on the night of the election, it was like the late night, and I woke up and went to the work the next day, and my wife, she came in and she said, "Congratulations, your guy won." And I was smiling on the subway among a sea of droopy faces, so I just want to thank you personally for your effort.
All the credit goes to Donald Trump. I hope you're watching, Mr. President. All the credit goes to Trump.
Yeah.
All of it.
Okay.
110% of it.
Yeah. I got 100 questions I want to ask you, but I'm just going to stick to the one that I don't know if you read Tucker Carlson's Ship of Fools. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a friend.
Yeah, okay. that's the kind of the parallel that I'm fascinated with between you and him.
Well, you know, Tucker and I he was a competitor to Andrew.
Yeah.
And then when Andrew died, we were fierce competitors. In fact, I built a lot of Breitbart by going in and hiring some of his best guys. And I said, hey, if you had him under contract, you know, it's free market capitalism, brother. and he and I were not particularly close.
No, okay.
Until later when, you know, Tucker is now a fire-breathing populist. Yeah. And every night on Fox, I mean, he's giving it to you with the fire on. He's fantastic. And I'm very close to him. And I think the world of this guy. And he gets a lot of grief. I mean, they're cutting his advertisers every day like they try to cut the advertisers of Breitbart and all the right-wing sites. So if you can support him, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's great. And I think that's the same kind of appeal you have. And I think the way they're attacking him is because of his appeal and your appeal. It's like, because you like cut through this like generic Republican like economic stance and everything. And I'm wondering, this like approach to everything, like a pragmatic approach to like censorship on the internet and tariffs and everything, it's like a bridge to the left, and that's why I think they attack you. And I'm wondering, how can we communicate this over so we can win over?
Look, there's certain. This is the thing with Bernie Sanders. There's 20%. We have to have other coalitions. You know, I don't need to tell you guys here in Norway that, you know, we just can't win with the voters we've got. We've got to do something that spreads it out. The problem with and this is what I tell the Republicans, is that when I talk to the donors, I said, hey, you hate my guts, but it's not between me and Paul Ryan and the Heritage organization. Those guys can't win national campaigns anymore. That day's over. It's between me and Bernie Sanders, or me and AOC, or me and Elizabeth Warren, right? So if you want to have your asset, because I'm telling you, in the United States, and this is with this younger generation, and it's not just because we whine all the time because of the way they've been educated. It is part of that, but it's also the way they look at the world. Do they see capitalism working that well for their parents? Do they see capitalism working that well for their brothers and sisters, right? Do they see this new serfdom where you're just on the wheel, right? You've got a little bit of credit so you can just kind of keep going, but you don't have enough to get married or to have a family, have a couple of kids, or have the wife not work if she doesn't want to. You don't. So that system, that structure is not sellable on a national level, certainly not in the United States of America. That's what Donald Trump cut through. Remember, go back to the primary. When he was at the top of the escalator, he's in 7th place, okay? Nobody took him seriously. At the bottom of the escalator after the speech, when the left went nuts that night, because he talked about immigration and trade in a totally new vernacular, he was number 1 and never looked back. Right? I think Ben Carson came within 2 points in October, but he was always number 1. And Fox tried to kneecap him. But go back, those 16 candidates, Bush, Rubio, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Chris Christie, if you take every vertical that the Republican Party and the donor class, the Singers, the Kochs, Heritage, Cato, all of them, it had been billions of dollars to build up the best candidate in that class, best libertarian Rand Paul, best big government Republican governor Chris Christie, best limited government Ted Cruz, right? Ben Carson, the Bush apparatus, fully on display, and the neocons with Rubio, on and on and on. Donald Trump cut through that whole thing like a scythe through grass. The voters were with him from day one, right? That's what, and he brought in, we would not win and we won't win in 2020 and in the future unless we bring working class Democrats who don't want to see the rise of political Islam, right? Want to have the sovereignty of their borders, don't want to have unfair foreign competition in their labor markets, want to confront China in the economic war they've been running against the West, and want somebody that will stand up for their interests. Working class people in Europe, in the United States, have been 40 and 50 years with having no voice. And remember, the way the globalists run is very simple. Not in the room, not in the deal. right? Donald Trump gets you in the room. Salvini gets you in the room. Orban gets you in the room. Bolsonaro gets you in the room. That's why we're winning. And that's why we're winning with not just conservatives. Thank you so much for having me.